Please welcome the incredibly talented, an artist who I've admired for quite some time and who has custom paintings in our household. The beautiful and also a fellow tall girl, Zoë Pawlak.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So how I found you was we have a beautiful blank wall in our house. We had lived in this home for 2 years, and I refused to get your standard home sense prints or go to somewhere that just has like a million versions of a print. I wanted to find a Canadian female artist. And I wasn't really actively looking because I just felt that God will deliver this person. And Instagram delivered you to find out, and obviously because of similar connections, but that we have some friends, mutual friends, and that's kind of why they said, hey, maybe you'll like this person because your friends like this person. And then I saw the art and I said, wow, this is it. This is the person. And then I fell in love with you, and then we become friends. And you've come to our Christmas party. You've come to visit us. It's like, you don't even live that close.
No.
Yeah.
When you like people, you like people. You got to just go for it.
Yeah, I feel like Instagram sometimes does a really good job at saying, hey, you're going to like this person.
Yeah. And sometimes you get a stage 5 clinger, and I kind of fall somewhere in between.
No, but you're such a cool friend, and checking up to and tapping in, just making sure that I'm good and life is good. And I really appreciate that. It says a lot about you, but you are so talented. It's unreal. And I'm so blessed to have your artwork in our home.
Thanks. Yeah. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do and why you do it.
Yeah. Well, my name's Zoë Pawlak, and I am a painter and an industrial designer. And a lot of people don't know what that means. So for everyone who doesn't know what an industrial designer is, it means anyone who's designing something that's made by others. So if I was hand knotting rugs, I would be a weaver or, a rug maker. But if I'm designing something and it's made somewhere else, I refer to myself as an industrial designer. So I've designed furniture, mirrors, mostly rugs. I've been doing rug design for 12 years. So I have 3 lines of rugs. And I sell a lot of custom work to clients like yourselves and also through interior designers. So currently, for example, I'm traveling in Toronto, and I visit interior designers, and I specialize in custom work for their clients. So I visit them, and we make sure that the client's getting what they need for the house. Because often when people are looking for art, like yourself, they can't find it in a gallery or in a store. And so I've done over 600 custom commissions. So that's my work life. And then in my life, I love helping other women get sober, other people getting sober. I walk that journey with a lot of people. And I have 2 teenagers that are 15 and 18.
That's crazy. I look at you and I'm like, you still look like a baby. There's no way you've done over 600 custom pieces or have kids.
I had them when I was like 12, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's it. Me too. Yeah. Actually, I was 13 when I had my kids.
Yeah.
So what got you into this? Were you always an artist? Was there always something you were kind of playing around with?
I was a high-level athlete, actually, and I broke my leg and got quite depressed in grade 9, which took me to South America. I lived with my uncle in Chile for 6 months, and his wife there was a Chilean, and she was an artist. And that was my first glimpse into seeing what that was like as a hobby and what it would look like to possibly do that as a career. I came back from that experience and went to a fine arts high school for grades 10, 11, and 12. And I was rigorously trained in high realism, and then went on to study high realism in university, painting and drawing, and studied the nude specifically. And so from there began my career. I just have been a professional painter since the second I left art school. Never took another job, and have done it full time now for 18 years.
Right. I also broke my ankle in grade 9.
Yeah.
But my path didn't lead me to being an artist. It's like, ooh, what could I have done in those moments? I am an artist, though. I'm actually part of this really cool book club with my friend Stephanie Karlovitz, and we're reading the book by Rick Rubin, Creative Act.
Yeah.
And part of our homework during the course of this book club is to create or to pick one thing to be an artist in, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something different. So in November, Deanna's bringing me to the Taylor Swift concert. And I said, you know what? I'm going to bedazzle my own boots, like the Louboutin boots that she wears.
Yeah.
And so I got all the supplies and I started every day adding a little bit, like another row of little jewels. Let me tell you, there is something so beautiful in doing that. And I feel like we are all artists, and whether it's painting or rug design or bedazzling boots, or if you're a doctor or an accountant, whatever it is you love to do, we are all artists. And I think that we need to spend more time dabbling in the things that allow us to get into a complete and utter state of flow.
Yeah.
Those moments where you're like, you lose track of time.
Yeah.
And what are those moments for you?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge how important I feel like that book is right now in our time. I feel like it's a really important piece that has come into the wider consciousness. And I mention that just because if anybody wants to grab it or be granted permission to step into any creative pursuit that they've been longing towards for a long time, I think it's a really incredible book for our time right now. And even for creatives, for example, for myself, I specialize in painting, but I'm also writing a pilot. And I am terrified, for example, to sing in front of other people. So for me, a goal might be to sing in front of other people, one song or something. So I think creating goals for ourselves, whether we deem ourselves an artist or not, I think what he's doing is debunking the myth that an artist is a special person on a pedestal and they need to have certain credentials or be granted certain permissions to create perfect pieces. He's talking a lot about channeling and just bringing forward that which is already within you and that which we've lost. And so I just think it's a really cool thing that you're doing. And I do believe that we can get lost in flow state. And it's really powerful, just like being like an athlete. You can get lost in flow state in exercising or in making love or in, baking. A lot of people, for them, cooking is really creative. There's just so many ways that we can move creativity through our lives if we kind of loosen up the reins around what it might mean to be creative, lowercase c, and just be.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Because I get lost. So I think of flow state is your state of being an artist. I get lost in writing pitches. Might not sound too sexy to some because it's not really something you can hang on a wall. I'm sure if it was a really good pitch, I could frame it and it would be awesome. But it is my form of artistry where I can take complex things. Like when we onboard a new client, they're like, here's this file and that file and this thing. And then I just kind of bring it all together to make it look beautiful in a way where it's just easy to understand. And this is why I like spreadsheets that have words, not necessarily numbers. I get in that state of flow of organizing complex data. But I also get into a state of flow of bedazzling boots. Here's the trick to all this too. And especially why it's important to listen to the likes of Rick Rubin is we're in this day and age, and it keeps getting worse, that we're so connected to a device that when you are in the process of creating this act of artistry, it is so crucial that you don't have that device. You don't have that with you because we want to listen to the next podcast or check the Instagram or check the email because it's right there. Play the music, leave the device in another room. Let me tell you, that is the best way to get into a state of flow and to enjoy the process of whatever it is you're creating.
Yeah.
And nothing else in life changes if you haven't checked Instagram or your emails for like a couple hours.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also deeply creative. I know on this podcast, you talk a lot about entrepreneurship. And I think that we know that being an entrepreneur itself is a creative process. So I like what you said about, you've got spreadsheets and words and what you're doing. And this is what Rick talks about a little bit, but we know that you're bringing together a lot of ideas. And in my work too, I'm doing a lot of listening because a lot of business is listening. It's listening to people, well, and then taking those pieces and being like, I hear you saying this, that you want this for your custom piece. How about we put this together and this together and this together, and amalgamating all of those things and using your particular alchemizing capacities and your particular magic to weave together something that you then deliver back to your client. And I think that's so essentially what entrepreneurship has been for me. And so when people are amazed, they always say, for example, I can't believe you're a creative and you're also a business person. Those things to me are so inextricably linked and connected and so deeply rooted in wanting to be of service that, I can't imagine not having a career where those two things come together. They're not polarized. And I think in our culture, they're largely polarized. And I think it's time to kind of like undo that myth.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think we like to think in dualities. I think that's been the way we've been, like man and woman. You know, we've done this, and then at times, and especially right now, we see it's easier for the powers that be to have us to simplify information and have these two things seem to oppose one another. I don't need to bring up any examples. I think everybody can kind of come up with a few on their own. And I think what it does is it doesn't allow for nuance and conversation and gray areas and aliveness. And in that, they can have more control and more say over how we should sort of act. And so the opposite of that is me having my own ideas, my own autonomy, my own health, my own wellness, my own desire to live, my own desire to want to shop at the secondhand store and not eat certain types of food and want to be radical in my own way. And that's terrifying for, the powers that be, because it doesn't make me very subservient. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but I think that it's a larger view of the more specific answer to your question is that we want people to be this or this, and we don't have a lot of room for this,
The messy middle.
Yeah.
And the middle is the biggest part. It got me thinking of this book I'm reading now called The Witch Wound.
Oh, yes.
Oh man, I'm going down this rabbit hole, but let me tell you.
Good.
We won't talk about that.
No.
But it is so interesting. I actually brought this up at my friend's son's birthday last night because people were just asking what's new in my life.
Yeah.
And I mentioned, I'm studying witches. They're like, what? I go, you know what? Right now it's the history of the burning times. So fascinating.
Yeah.
You know what? This all does relate because we think about the things that stop us from doing the things that we know we want to do, that our heart desires as women. Because back 500 plus years ago, we would have been burned alive to do things that went against what Catholicism told us to do. Women were witches because we had the power to be able to help other women understand and help other women give birth and do all the things that a male doctor was supposed to do. But coming back to this too, is like when you think of running a business, operating a business, it's still very masculine. And even understanding the idea of asking for money is still a very masculine thing. Mm-hmm. And business is the exchange of energy. Business is about earning a living, about having a great, comfortable life. Because here's the thing, is people think that if somebody makes more money, it means that they're taking that from somebody else. But that's not how the universe works. The universe works in a way that money isn't finite. It's created and it's multiplied as much as you allow it to be for yourself and for others. But this book would tell us otherwise, saying that that would not be the case for women, that we would not be allowed to live that abundant life. But it also got me thinking too about something that I really do want to talk to you about, about a journey that I've been on for a little while too, that I've actually found some peace in connecting with you about this because it is very important to you.
Yeah.
It's very important to this household and also to the mission that my husband has about sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your journey and your story. And then I want you to end on why this is a message that you're sharing with the world.
Well, I'm going to start with that because I'm a rebel. But the reason I'm sharing it is because I've seen lives transformed. So I'll start with that. I've seen whole families, entire family systems change. I've seen forgiveness in front of my eyes. I've witnessed things that I never would think were possible. So yeah, I got sober 7.5 years ago, and I got to a point where I felt like I was carrying my life uphill. I was around 35, and it was time for me to quit drinking. And I shared that on my Instagram. Maybe year one said I was 1 year sober, 2 years, even back then it was a little bit still new. So the first two people who I found in those days that were developing language outside of the AA system were Holly Whitaker and Laura McCohen. And they were writing books and articles and hip sobriety and had a podcast called Home at the time. And I started to listen to these women and I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. There was like this surrender of, that's me. I was drinking to excess a couple times a week, and it was starting to catch up on me, with me, and with my relationships in my family, specifically in the privacy of our home. And like a lot of women, my drinking increased when I had children, which is very common. And there's this whole culture as well around that being okay, Mm-hmm. And so I started to share about that. And when I had sort of the first person come to me, and I'm often the person that people come to if they know me and they say, listen, I'm struggling with alcohol use, abuse, or dependency. And I just kind of walk that path with them and help them get the resources that they need and stay in touch and plug them into something that makes sense for them so that they can stay sober, because you can get sober alone, but you can't stay sober alone.
So, no.
Yeah.
I just had a person close to me who just went to a 40-day, how would you say it?
Detox, like retreat detox.
Yeah. Yeah. And this person has been struggling for quite some time. Very aware. She's very open about that struggle. And it got me curious too, because I think we all have a unique relationship to alcohol. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a household where my parents had a drink or two every day.
Yeah.
There was no ever like physical violence or nothing. It just was a very amazing childhood. So my relationship to alcohol was I just assumed everybody had 1 or 2 drinks at dinner time every single day. And then maybe on the occasional weekend would have like a party.
Yeah.
And when I got together with my now husband, who was also drinking, this was normal. And I'm not going to tell about his relationship, but he's also sober, and he just celebrated his 13-year sobriety last month.
Yeah.
Or 12-year sobriety last month. Gosh, it's the same age as my son. Anyway, and I was never curious about it because I never thought that I had a problem.
Yeah.
Because society wants you to be okay having a couple of drinks when you go out for dinner, when you have friends over, any social occasion, there's always something there for us to drink. And so I got used to that. I got used to that being the expectation and for me to participate. And I remember during the times of having my boys, anytime I decided not to drink because I just did not want to, it always came up with are you pregnant again? Mm-hmm. And then I'd have to go down this whole rabbit hole conversation about, no, I actually just don't want to have a drink. Like for women, it's just like you're pregnant or something, or it's just like, no.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, what? It was fascinating. So then I wrote a little note. Well, I did like 75 hard a couple of years ago. And in 75 hard, it's like, you can't drink. You have to follow it with diet. You have to work out twice a day. journal, read 10 pages of a book, take progress photos, and drink 4 liters of water. And I thought, oh gosh, the hardest thing is going to be not to drink. And it wasn't. That was actually the easiest thing of everything. It ended up being the easiest thing. And so this whole sober thing, I'm curious because, and this is partially why I wanted you to come onto the show, because you've inspired me. Can we talk about like some trends that we're seeing right now too?
Sure. Which kind of trends?
Well,
mummy wine.
Well, and that's the thing. So like the whole mummy drinking culture, I thought went overboard during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I don't see that as much anymore. And quite frankly, I'm seeing more and more of my own friends committing to being sober. Like they just don't even want to drink anymore.
Yeah.
What is your prediction for the next couple years?
Well, I think we will see the occasional recreational and medicinal use of psychedelics on the rise. I think we'll see the legalization of psychedelics, which I'm really excited for. I think that we will, I'm tentative because one, I'm no forecaster and you know, things change all the time. But we are in a spiritual crisis. People are in a crise, like a squeezing, you know, a crisis, you know, can mean to like be stuck, you know, in a squeezing place. And, there's liberation on the other side of quitting alcohol. And I think as we continue to spread the word and as we continue to see more, beverages become available to us, it gets more and more exciting and we start to feel more alive. And I think that the reason I hesitate to say what we're going to see in our culture is because we see through a very narrow lens. So when I say, for example, my teens, because they've grown up with this mother who doesn't drink and their friends are all talking more and more about not drinking alcohol. That doesn't mean that's happening everywhere. So I definitely know that it's happening and, it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
I had a guest on the show 3 years ago. She no longer does the work because I was actually looking her up the other day, but, she was all about like teaching women how to become sober. And there's so much wrapped up in this. There's so much trauma. In my mind, I believe that everybody has an addiction to something. And the optimal addiction would be that it's a healthy addiction, like working out or reading books. So I'm curious to know, when you got to this point where you understood this was no longer serving you, how did you go about letting it go of your life completely?
I had this vision of what a rock bottom could look like. So I think I have to go back a few steps. And in our culture, we have to first look at what you think an alcoholic is. What does that look like? And so 9 out of 10 people would say, I believe that's a man who's in his 80s, who's drinking out of a paper bag, who's lost his job, who's probably homeless, et cetera, et cetera. So media or however we got this cultural understanding of what that looks like, we don't think that it looks like me or you. And so when we start there, we've got a lot of people pretending. And then you layer on that we've got this culture for whom this is the pervasive norm. So you imagine kind of being in a soup and you're just floating around in the soup and you've always been in the soup. So you're like, I never noticed, I never noticed that this is like you mentioned. And it's not until you stop and you sort of step outside of it. And for many of us, that took us a couple months of getting sober and then 6 months of getting sober and then a year. And then you're slowly looking around going, why are we drinking in the middle of the day at a baby shower? Why is this woman drunk on a boat while there's children here? Wait a minute. Why are we getting drunk, at our daughter's grad and not remembering it? Like, why are we marking these really so-called important, pivotal, culturally significant moments with drunkenness? And if we really start there with curiosity and inquiry and like, whoa, what is going on? And the opposite of that would be, why wouldn't at something that these marked, most important special occasions, whether it's your parents come in from out of town and you have a barbecue, why would you want to remember that and be present to that and be alive and be completely in tune with whatever everyone needs and what's going on and present to that moment? You know, so it's the dampening of our aliveness. And when we start with the question, why would we want to live that way? We can start to peel back a bunch of layers to this onion, and it starts to not make as much sense.
No, and it certainly doesn't. And you think about it, it is poison.
It's ethanol.
It's poison.
So it's like,
and listen, I'm not going to deny the fact that I love wine. And it's gotten to the point where I even allowed myself to believe that I liked the taste of it. Mm-hmm. When, come on. Do you remember your first sip of whatever? It's like, really? I'm choosing this over chocolate milk?
Yeah. My uncle used to say if we really liked the taste of it, we would put it on our breakfast cereal. Like you don't really, you know, and when you think about, for example, like I feel this calling towards quitting coffee soon. And when I've had too much coffee, if I really taste the actual beverage, I'm like, oh, this doesn't taste that great. Like you're really there's this kind of trickery of the mind.
Well, my coffee, I don't drink black. I put a little bit of the almond creamer in it. And I think I drank it for the almond creamer, not the actual coffee.
Yeah.
So in terms of like reflecting back on those first moments of sobriety and your business, what was the big difference that happened? What were the shining moments in what that meant for you as an entrepreneur?
I guess I'll share a story first about how bad it got, because I think knowing that it's lovely to hear a victory story, but I'll just kind of share something with you that kind of scared me. I was most often drinking privately and kind of binge drinking on my own, or just drinking a little bit more than everybody else when I got home, or a bottle of wine here or there. And at times I was drinking publicly. And so for me in my work, that looks like going to trade shows or being at like client dinners, etc. And I had gone to this furniture showroom for an opening, and I had drank a bunch. And then I came back the next morning and said to my colleague who owned this furniture store, I said, oh, I didn't get a chance to view the new collection last night at the party. Would you mind walking me through the collection? I'd love to see it. And I was hungover and so on. And she said, Zoe, I walked you through the collection twice last night.
Oh.
So it was like that, and what's fascinating when you have the trickery of the mind is fascinating, right? We've all done this where we're like, oh God, I'm never going to drink again. And then by 3 p.m., your friend wants you to meet for a mimosa, and you're like, oh, it's just a mimosa, and it's just a patio, and it's just the sunshine, and
hair of the dog.
It's hair of the dog, and it's just like, I'm just going to go for, like a kayak, and I'll have a mimosa on the. So there's like this harmless language with which we like re-enter our relationship to alcohol, sometimes the very next day, and that is a literal insanity. That is a fascinating. The definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results. And so the disease of alcoholism, or the, however you want to call it, the allergy to alcohol or alcohol use, abuse, and dependency sort of goes like this, right? And so, but suddenly you're up over here using a lot, more than you used to. But in these down moments, we convince ourselves that we're okay. And so I mention that because after that experience, or sometimes people do terrible things under the influence, but it's not then that they actually quit. They're like, I don't know why I didn't quit when I got a DUI, or smashed my friend's car, or was slammed a door, or was verbally abusive to someone, or whatever, got in a fight. It's rarely those things that change them. It's oftentimes a spiritual rock bottom, or a culmination of those things, or someone that we love threatening to leave us, which is common. Somebody from the outside reflecting back and saying, you have a problem, and this has gone too far. And so we can very rarely see ourselves. And so I mention that because it's sometimes hard to see. Like for others, they might see something very clearly and be like, why? If you know me now and I ever did anything even remotely out of integrity, you know that that's not who I am. That's not how I operate. But for me, there was such a gray area and such a shifty line that I could talk myself into or out of, that that was the level of addiction.
Mine was not that I would lose control. My ego is so strong. I don't like to get to the point of not having full control or forgetting what I would have done and said. But it was just like the volume wasn't in, I'm going to go out hard on like a Friday or Saturday and then just drink like a whole bottle of wine would have just been like more than enough. But it was like the daily glass of wine. Mm-hmm. And it was assuming that every event I go to, there's going to be some drinks and I'll have it and I'll have one or two. But every time I had just one, I always said, why did I even do that? Mm-hmm. What was the purpose of this? Because now it takes me like 3 days to even get over just having a glass of wine. I feel it forever. But if you can actually remind yourself of those patterns, of those moments in your life when you have eaten clean, worked out, drank a lot of water, get a good night's sleep, and how good you feel, and that clarity of mind, of soul, spirit in your relationships, isn't that strong enough for you to want to pursue sobriety? And maybe for some it is.
For some it is, but I think it's a really good question. I really am glad you brought it up, because there are some people for whom we have a friend in common, and she just said, I didn't feel good and I like to feel good. But for so many of us, we're used to not feeling so good. So anxiety, or the place I came from, is my home state. So our body wants to survive and it wants to take us back to this place. So for example, you might say, why would someone so lovely as Zoe be in a relationship with somebody who seems like sort of, I don't know, anxious or something? Then for me, that might be like my home place. So my soul and my kind of DNA and my body and all of that, my physiology is craving to go back there. So it is not enough for some people. There's a few things. One, some people are just addicted and they just have that deep addiction to alcohol. And for some people, the other thing is that they physiologically want to be in chaos or whatever it is. And so if it's not alcohol, you'll see them transfer it to another addiction. And so for me, for example, I find that I have to watch for something I call graspiness, where in me, I want like more, And so though I'm free from this one particular beverage, there's still a complete insanity in here. And so I've had to do a lot of the inner work. And that's why we see people who haven't done the inner work, you'd call them maybe a dry drunk or something. I would never judge anyone and call them that. But there's a term where what it's indicating is that they haven't done the inner work. So all of these parts are still like, sort of insane, but they just don't drink alcohol anymore,
I've never heard that term before.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Dry drunk.
I feel like I know a few people.
I mean, it's not for us to diagnose.
Judging.
Yeah, but exactly.
So would that mean then? And I know by no means that we're experts or therapists.
Yeah.
If you have an issue, please go see a doctor or an expert. But would those people be more susceptible to relapse? The dry drunks?
Yeah. I mean, same thing. It's not a professional opinion, but I would imagine if you haven't done like the inner work, yeah, I would say like you're white knuckling life. You're always like, if I had a porn addiction, I'm just going to use something that I don't have. But then every time you're around your device, you're tempted to, like, if you have a food addict, like you haven't done the inner work to be like, okay here. I have to get okay here, so that I can just walk by a liquor store and be like, namaste. Like, it's like walking by a kayaking store or like a hardware store. I'm like, it doesn't faze me anymore because it's not a place I go. I don't kayak and I don't do hardware stuff. So and I don't do liquor. So it's like, it doesn't faze me, but that's because I've done the inner work.
So what was that inner work for you? What'd you do?
Well, I'm in a recovery program and I spend a lot of time helping other people who struggle. And I do a lot of like yoga, exercise. I joined a women's basketball team right when I first got sober. And that really helped me to plug into a community of people who, one, had no idea that I ever used to drink and didn't really care. And also in the best way possible, because they were like, well, just learn how to dribble the ball better and like learn how to can pass the ball. Movement and sport, like replugging back into that really helped me at the beginning, especially. And now too, I would be insane if I didn't exercise. So,
oh, tell me about it. I've just only on maybe not quite 3 weeks post rhinoplasty, and I can only this week start getting back into the gym. I was not allowed to raise my heart rate whatsoever because it caused swelling. And I will say movement, like I was moving, walking, but movement at a certain level of intensity kind of reprograms and resets for me. My family knows if I didn't go to the gym. They know the days that I crush a CrossFit WOD because I'm the happiest human being ever. To not have that was really difficult.
Yeah.
It was really, really tough. I don't even know what I did. To be honest with you, during the first week and a half of like lying in bed, I'm so thankful that there was no Netflix show or movie that I actually cared to watch.
Yeah.
I just did a lot of like writing and organizing my podcast stuff because I like to organize. But wow, the temptation at some moments were there too, to have a glass of wine. But I knew for many reasons, it even says like, don't even drink for 2 months after surgery because your body is still repairing. And our house doesn't really have anything. That's the big thing too, is don't make it freely available. Like we have really expensive bottles of whiskey that were gifts and it's disgusting, and red wine, which I don't like to drink anyway. But when you don't have it there, you have to want it bad enough to leave your house to go and get it.
Yeah.
And then there's also that feeling of shame that the purpose of your trip is to go and get something. No. So anyways, I'm on this really weird journey. My husband is a huge supporter. And as of late, I've asked him to call me out on anything and just do it. Like no secrets, no shame. This is a point I want to get to. I know the good sobriety does for me, especially emotionally, spiritually, and as a parent. Like cut that out of my life. I feel like I can conquer mountains.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at least get through the day.
You know, getting through the day
is conquering
hard.
mountains.
But it's not hard. For me, it's not hard. Like, I mean, even Dan was like, hey, we want to do this like really gorgeous catamaran trip next March. Couples only, all inclusive. And most people that are coming on the boat don't drink. There's one woman who loves to have her wine, but there's also, we're inviting a couple who it's important that it be a dry boat because they're in recovery. And I was like, let's make it a dry boat, because knowing that it's there as an option isn't going to help me.
No. But
also knowing that there would be no temptation makes it an even more beautiful, enlightening potential journey and trip. So this conversation is important because I really feel like it's your message too, but it's also something that I'm struggling with. And I know so much that there's other women out there struggling too. Do you have any resources, books you've read, Instagram accounts to follow that might help people on this journey?
Yeah, maybe we can leave some in the show notes. Is that a possibility?
Well, 100%.
For sure. Yeah. As I mentioned, I love the work of Laura McCohen and Holly Whitaker. I think the book Quit Like a Woman is really great. I loved a book called Drink by Anne Dowsett Johnson. She's Canadian and was a professor at at McGill. There's a really great book called This Naked Mind that talks more about the culture at large of marketing around alcohol branding and sort of the culture that we're in, that is really eye-opening as well. So yeah, definitely a fan of reading is how I got here. Reading is good because it can be done in the privacy of your home. So if you're struggling and you don't want to tell anybody yet, you can just read. And I found camaraderie and companionship through those authors, and then sort of found a language that I was able to step into and claim as my own and start to be able to better articulate myself. Because I think when you're struggling, and if you haven't read anything about sobriety or getting sober, you kind of are in the dark and you feel like you're alone. And the other thing is that you just might not have the language for where you fall along that spectrum of use.
Yeah.
And just any sort of self-help, or even if you like your yoga teacher or a trusted friend, just tell somebody that you're struggling. I think that's the best advice. Just put up your hand and let somebody trusted know, and then have them walk you towards some resources.
Yeah. I think that was you for me.
Yeah. I'm happy to be that person for anybody.
And to get some really nice art in your house.
There's a small entry fee. No, I'm kidding.
Just some custom art.
Yeah.
A couple hundred pieces for your house.
No.
I was going to say something too about this. I liked that spectrum of where you might fall on that idea, because when we go back to like that initial question you ask about what does an alcoholic look like to me?
Yeah.
It's actually not that 80-year-old man with the brown bag.
Yeah.
It is women our age who are running businesses, parenting, who are drinking a glass or two, sometimes even half a bottle or a bottle a day, almost every day. They're functional, but they always feel like a little bit of crap all day long. They never feel 100%. Partially because maybe they don't think they deserve it either. There's that. But they're functional and they're such key figures in our society, and they don't feel good. They're not living their best lives. That to me is an alcoholic in my life. And part of that is like I identify myself in that a few years ago, especially during the pandemic when things got crazy. Like I remember drinking before homeschooling my kids at like 11 a.m. We're stuck at home during those 2 months. And some of that habit took forever to let go because I thought this was just normal. I see it on TikTok. Every other mom's doing the same thing. And we're joking around this wine culture, and it became acceptable. But even in the back of my mind, I go, this is absolutely shameworthy. This is not good. It does not help mothers. It doesn't help women. And here we are, just all kind of paying tribute to this new mom wine culture and being okay with it.
Yeah, I think what's important there is that we use wherever we recognize that we're sick as an indicator. So it's almost like a compass that points us towards where we're unwell. And so what comes up for me is that acknowledging that women are self-medicating. So if someone's self-medicating, our curiosity would lead us towards the question of what are they self-medicating from? And if we were to really, look at that and say, for example, why doesn't a mom feel supported when she's homeschooling? Where are the resources for her to hire a teacher? Why is daycare so expensive? Why is their partner not necessarily helping with household tasks 50-50? Why are people living in Kelowna without air conditioning? If we actually took care of mothers and families, not just mothers, but families and parents, especially of young children, then it would be a whole hell of a lot harder to, as a society, take good care of them. So when we see anyone self-medicating, we always need to use that as what is that pointing towards in the place in them that is suffering.
They talk about that in the Witch Wound book, how women back in the day would spend more time with other women than they would with their husbands. Because as a village, as a collective, women would just help each other raise each other's kids like they were their own. And I think if that existed today, there'd be more healed women in this world, bringing back the village.
Yeah,
right?
We're really isolated.
We are. Anything else you want to end on?
I guess we could talk for a minute about faith and spirituality, and because I think it's yes, we're walking around here in these meat sacks for bodies, doing CrossFit and trying to stay alive. But the walk for me has really been a spiritual walk. And in the hardest moments, I really think that when you're faced with yourself, that any sort of spiritual pursuit and rigorous pursuit of practices around how to support yourself. I always think of, if you've ever taken kids bowling, they can put up these little bumpers so that the ball doesn't kind of go down the gutter ball. And I think of my spirituality like that. Like the ball can it eventually ends up in the right spot because it can't get that far. And in my spiritual walk, that's looked a lot like, deep conversations with other people, being open about when and where I've been struggling, and continued prayer and meditation and exercise and, all of these different practices, journaling, most importantly recently, which is why I created the Oracle deck, was to lead people to journaling so that they would be supported through their own practices of writing, so that they could kind of figure out what's going on up here in this dangerous place where we live.
Yeah, I've actually started this practice where I have my bookmark for the books that I'm reading is the slim notebook that I journal. So whenever I read something, whether it's a business book or like The Witch Wound or Rick Rubin's book, I will just stop and I will write my thoughts around the thing. And it helps me remember the concepts of the book, but also allows me to get the thing off my chest. Because what happens is that as soon as you start writing, that's when the stuff comes out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like I could be talking about marketing and funnels and all of a sudden it comes back to being a mother that I wish, it's like, it's crazy how journaling helps. But I think some of the biggest healing that I've done in the past 3 years has been journaling, morning pages.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I created the Oracle deck, because with the Oracle deck, you have, so if people don't know what I'm referring to, I created this deck of cards, and it's 40 of my favorite paintings with these beautiful words on it, but it's accompanied by a booklet. And in the booklet, it gives you an expanded meaning on the card itself, but at the bottom of each one, there is a journal prompt for every morning. So if people are struggling with what I heard people saying was that they were struggling with maintaining that practice. So they were starting journaling, loved it, found it was effective, but just couldn't keep up with it. So my hope is that this helps people continue that practice.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
I do like Oracle card readings about almost every other day, usually in the morning or at night. And I have, 5 different decks, but yours is in the rotation. And I just use it as I feel called to use it. If it's like this card is something to help guide me through today, because it's a busy day, then that is, I think the card that I shared on social the other day was grace. I'm like, that's the grace I need for the day. And then that's the energy I need for the day.
Yeah, totally.
Beautiful deck. We'll put that in the show notes too.
Thank you.
So I have one last question for you. When I ask you what it means to be a wild woman, what is that to you?
I think that to me is being brave enough to follow your own intuition, even when things aren't the cultural norm. And being wild is the pursuit of that continuous inclination towards following one's own intuition and carving out your own path and being brave enough to stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah, girl.
Yeah, girl.
So if people want to go online to find you or follow you, where can they go?
In my name, Zoe Pawlak. If you Google my name, you can find everything. My art, my Instagram is Zoë Pawlak. Zoë Pawlak. And that's it. Just my name. You can find me and the Oracle deck.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.